Chapter 3. "The devil!" cried Musket in exasperation more than recognition. His eyes, pink with sleep, batted furiously. Shirt unbuttoned, neckerchief askew, he showed nothing of his afternoon jauntiness. "I thought you were a burglar! What are you doing in my coach?" "They tried to smash our press," blurted Theo, too caught up in his own distress to be surprised at the sight of his one-time customer. "They were going to arrest us." "You're in trouble with the law?" Musket squinted at him. "Well, don't put us in the same pickle, whatever it is. Out! Off with you!" "Please, let me rest. I don't know what to do. My master's out there somewhere. They're after him. They'll be after Dr. Absalom, too." The dwarf had been making every effort to push Theo out of the coach. Hearing this, he stopped abruptly. "Sit there," ordered Musket. "Don't leave." The dwarf pulled on his boots, tumbled from the coach, and scurried across the yard toward the inn-house. Alone, Theo tried to set his thoughts in order. He cursed himself for not following Anton, and again for not finding him. He put his head in his hands and closed his eyes, only to see the officer's ashen face. Musket was back. At his heels, a bulky figure was hastily cramming a shirt-tail into his breeches. Theo climbed out of the coach. "Dr. Absalom?" The paunchy man shook his head. He had the plump features of an oversized baby with a ferocious black mustache. "I should say I am at your service, but more likely you shall be at mine. I am Count Las Bombas." Theo turned to Musket. "I thought you'd gone for Dr. Absalom." "In the press of circumstances, names are unimportant. They only confuse matters." The Count waved a hand, dismissing the question. "My coachman tells me you had some difficulties, and the name Absalom came up, shall we say, in conversation." Theo began his account while Las Bombas nodded encouragement, stopping him occasionally and asking him to repeat certain details. "The officer, you say, took one of the pages and kept it?" Theo nodded. "He called Dr. Absalom a fraud and wanted a closer look at him. After that, when he took out a pistol, I think I killed him. I swear it was an accident." "Heaven help us, then, if you ever do anything on purpose," said Las Bombas. "Now, the two soldiers, did they hear him?" "They must have. They were standing right there." "And no doubt will report it to someone, even if their superior is, no longer among us." "If they remember," said Theo, "after everything else that happened." "Inconvenient things are always remembered," said Las Bombas. "We must assume the worst. Wisdom dictates that Dr. Absalom will suddenly be called out of town. As for you, young man, allow me to inquire, what are you going to do to save your neck?" Theo had been turning over the same question. "I'll have to set things right. I'll go to the police, to the Dorning Constabulary." "The law!" Las Bombas stared at him. "Last place in the world to set things right." "What else can I do? My master could be in jail. They had no cause to break into the shop. We did nothing wrong. I meant the officer no harm." "My dear boy, who's to believe that?" It's the truth. They'll have to believe it." "It is constabulary nature to disbelieve." Count Las Bombas sighed and puffed out his cheeks. "I commend your sense of duty, but have no intention of sharing it. Musket and I shall be leaving directly." The dwarf, in fact, had been cramming garments into a flexible traveling case. Las Bombas urged him to greater speed, then waved a hand at Theo. "Farewell. Though I have gravest doubts, I wish a satisfactory resolution to your difficulties." Leaving the Count and his coachman busily packing, Theo made his way across the inn-yard. He drew the bolt on the gate and slipped out into the street. What had been so clear a choice in the shed now filled him with uneasiness. The Count, he feared, might well be right, and a bad affair turn worse. His decision had been the only honorable one. Instead of strengthening him, however, it burdened him. He gritted his teeth and set off for the constabulary. Before going any distance, he sighted one of the Dorning constables holding a lantern at the end of an alley. Theo called out and went toward him. The constable, after one glimpse, began running in the opposite direction. Having been chased through the streets a good part of the night, the puzzled Theo had to stretch his legs to chase the fleeting officer. He caught up with him at last, It was Constable Pon, whom he had known as long as he could remember. Pon immediately darkened his lantern. Usually good-natured, he rounded angrily on Theo. "What are you doing here? We've orders to search the town for you." "Well, you found me. I was on my way to the station house. Where's Anton? And the officer? Is he alive?" "He's got a broken head, but he'll mend." "Thank heaven. What about Anton?" "There's bad piece of business." Pon took Theo's arm. "Dorning's no place for you." "Well, I've got to settle things. It was my fault. I don't want Anton blamed." "He's dead!" cried Pon. "Shot down in the street. They're after you now." Theo stared, numb. Splinters of ice caught in his throat, choking and tearing him at the same time. Pon shook him furiously. "Listen to me. There's an order to arrest you. That was a royal inspector you brained, so it's a crown case, not some local mischief. We can't help you. You can't help Anton. You're to be locked up on sight." Pon hurried on. "But who's to say I saw you? We're going to search the woods west of the river. A wanted criminal? That's where he'd hide, wouldn't he? He'd never take to the open roads. The King's Highway? Last place he'd go. No need wasting our time in that direction, eh? Eh? Do you understand me?" Pon snapped his jaws shut, spun on his heel, and hustled away down the alley, shining his lantern into doorways and corners, as if seeking the fugitive in good earnest. Theo stood, bewildered, grasping at fragments of what Pon had told him. There was no reason, no justice in any of it. With a surge of anger, ignoring the constable's urging, he wanted to stay and face his accuser. Anton had committed no crime, nor had Theo. To leave his only home, his books, his work? Yet he knew, with bitterness, it had all suddenly become wreckage. Painfully, unwilling, he turned and forced his legs to carry him eastward from the town. The sky was lightening. Shreds of mist floated over the market gardens fringing the outskirts of Dorning. A rooster crowed in a farmyard. He pressed on at a faster pace, cutting across the newly plowed fields, dimly reckoning he would sooner or later strike the highway. Only now did the full weight of his grief bear down on him. Along with it was something more, lodged in the back of his mind like a cinder in the eye that could not be wept away. He could not bring himself to think about it. He could not bring himself to turn away from it. He was unable, finally, to stand it any longer. He admitted what he had hidden from himself and wished to forget. The frame had not slipped or twisted. It was not an accident. Never in his life had he raised a hand in anger. But in that moment, more than anything else in the world, he had wanted to kill that man. Until then, he had believed in his own good nature. He pleaded that he was a kindly, honorable human being. But the bloodied face rose up in front of him. His stomach heaved. He doubled over, retching. He sat on the ground a while, head pressed against his knees. He swore every way he knew. Never again would he do such a deed. He climbed at last to his feet. The road lay a short distance beyond the field. He set off for it. He did not look back. He did not dare.